This is the introduction to Collectio Musicorum's video recording of the Missa L'Homme Armé by Mattheus Pipelare, performed in the edition prepared by Dr. Ronald Cross. Dr. Cross became a professor of music at Wagner College in 1968 and remained there until his death in 2013 at the age of 84. He was a great advocate of early music and a wonderful mentor, both to myself and to many others who had the privilege of studying with him during his years at Wagner. Dr. Cross was also an expert on the music of Mattheus Pipelare, a composer who lived between approximately 1450 and 1515. Actually, Dr. Cross was the expert on it, and all subsequent research into Pipelare's music is based on the work he did in the 1950s when he had a Fulbright scholarship to travel throughout Europe studying manuscripts of Pipelare's music. His studies resulted in his 1961 dissertation at New York University, which contained transcriptions of all of Pipelare's music. These transcriptions were published in the 3-volume edition of the Complete Works of Pipelare, released by the American Institute of Musicology in 1967. Dr. Cross also wrote several other studies of Pipelare, including articles published in Musica Disciplina and the Musical Quarterly. Dr. Cross's research has shown that we know less about Pipelare than we thought we did. It is possible that Mattheus Pipelare was not even his name. In certain sources, he is called the son of Mattheus, so that may have been his father's name, not his. His surname means piper, as in the municipal musicians Renaissance towns and cities hired, so perhaps it refers to his father's profession rather than being his actual name. We don't know. He was probably, and there are lots of probablys when talking about Pipelare, born about 1450, possibly in Ghent, although some sources dating from the 19th century say he was born in Louvain. He most likely worked in Antwerp, which is where he was recruited to go to 's-Hertogenbosch, but he only lasted there 2 years, and after that, we don't know where he went. He probably died after 1512 because a manuscript from that time has a cross after his name, but that is not the most reliable source of information. He may have been related to one Johannes Pipelare, who was a singer in the papal chapel in Rome, and if this person was a relative, he may be the reason Pipelare's music is found in Italian manuscripts and prints. He left behind 10 complete masses and 1 mass movement, 10 other sacred works, motets and a setting of the Magnificat, and a chanson. Sources from the Renaissance and later comment favorably on his music, but his life is otherwise a secret. No portrait or signature of his has survived. Pipelare's L'Homme Armé Mass is a work based on a cantus prius factus, that is, a pre-existent melody. In this case, it was a well-known song of uncertain origin about an armed man. It goes like this: L'homme, l'homme, l'homme armé, l'homme armé, l'homme armé doit-on douter, on a fait pour tout crier, que chacun se vienne armé d'un brigand de fait. L'homme, l'homme, l'homme armé, l'homme armé, l'homme armé doit-on douter, doit-on douter. The translation found in Gustav Ries's Music in the Renaissance, a book Dr. Cross assisted with, is: "Oh, the man at arms, fills the folk with dread alarms. Everywhere I hear them wail, find, if you would breast the gale, a good stout coat of mail. Oh, the man at arms, fills the folk with dread alarms." This melody became remarkably popular in the Renaissance, and many composers used it as a basis for their works, especially for masses. Sometimes they would use the melody in one verse as a cantus firmus, which is when a song is used in its entirety in long notes. Other times, they used pieces of the song in various voices. In this Mass, Pipelare did both, And Dr. Cross sometimes talked about compositions from this time where the cantus prius factus appears all over the place, overwhelming the listener with the melody. It is heard complete at times in different voices in this Mass, and at other times in bits and pieces, sometimes just the rhythm with different pitches, and sometimes just some of the pitches in different rhythms. I wish that Dr. Cross had put more of his thoughts about how Renaissance composers used pre-existent melodies in his writing. Renaissance composers built on the patterns that their medieval colleagues had started in their motets when they composed new music against a section of medieval chant. Because not all music from the Renaissance has survived to this day, we don't know who wrote the first Mass based on L'Homme Armé. It may have been Guillaume du Fay, who wrote one in the 1460s, late in his life, but the younger composer Johannes Ockeghem may have used a tune in his Mass that actually predates the older composers. The major composer of the late 15th century, Josquin du Pré, wrote 2 Mass settings based on the tune, and it is during this period that Pipelare wrote his. While the details about this work of his, as with all the others, are mostly lacking, Daniel Ross Howard, in his 2010 master's thesis on L'Oise Compère, has dated the Jena 22 manuscript, one of the 6 sources for Pipelare's Mass, to 1498. So the work was completed by then. I personally think that Pipelare's work may have been written as a test piece, because in Lent of 1498, he began his new position as Zangmeester, or songmaster, of the illustrious confraternity of Our Lady in 's-Hertogenbosch, a large, thriving city in what is now the southern part of the Netherlands. Pipelare's time in Den Bosch, as it is often abbreviated, is the only part of his life that is definitively recorded, as there are official town records that state when he was hired, what he was paid while he was there, and when he left in May of 1500. The confraternity was a combination religious, charitable, and social organization. There were 2 types of members. The sworn members, the fratres jurati, lived in the city and took part in the group's activities. They were also called swan members because they donated the swans for the annual feast. Among the sworn members during Pipelare's time there was the painter Hieronymus Bosch. They probably knew each other. We don't know what Bosch thought of Pipelare's music, but I've always found it interesting that Bosch's picture of hell in the Garden of Earthly Delights contains many oversized musical instruments. It was a wealthy organization, and from its beginnings in 1318, sponsored the music performed during the services at the cathedral several times a week. Originally, they celebrated Mass in a side aisle, but in the latter part of the 15th century, a chapel was built for them. You can see it here on the ground plan from the 1632 as the non-symmetrical extension on the top right. As this modern picture shows, it is a beautiful work of architecture. The work of the Dutch musicologist Albert Smeers, who has examined the town archives of Den Bosch at length, has shown that the confraternity paid for a choir of 6 to 10 singers, which could be increased by 6 to 8 additional voices for special events. At the time, Pipelare was there. So the Collectio Musicorum chorus of 12 singers is about the same size Pipelare had to work with. Some of the sources currently on the internet report that when Pipelare wrote his L'Homme Armé Mass, it was written, and I quote from Wikipedia, in a style which was already old-fashioned by the time that he was writing. That is not true. There were many more L'Homme Armé masses written after Pipelare's, including 2 by Palestrina, and composers write them up to the present day. Indeed, church leaders at times complained about using secular songs as the basis for masses. Bishop Bernardino Cirillo wrote a letter that was eventually published. spreading his criticism throughout Italy. He wrote, and I read from Lewis Lockwood's translation, "They say, 'Oh, what a fine mass was sung in chapel.' And what is it, if you please? Is it L'Homme Armé, or Hercules, Dux Ferrarii, or Philomena?" These latter two are also tunes based in the secular world. The bishop continues, "What the devil has the mass to do with the armed man, or with Philomena, or with the Duke of Ferrara?" The use of secular music in church was one of the topics discussed later at the Council of Trent, but that is a story for a different time. Among the L'Homme Armé masses written in the 20th century was one by Dr. Cross's friend, Arnold Rosner, who was my piano teacher when I was a student at Wagner College. I attended, along with Dr. Cross, the premiere of a movement of Dr. Rosner's L'Homme Armé Mass, which was written in 1971, at what was then called Carnegie Recital Hall, and this was in 1978. I do not know if Dr. Cross suggested the Cantus Firmus to Dr. Rosner, but they were close friends. You can find out more about Dr. Rosner's music on the website arnoldrosnermusic.com. Dr. Cross had varying opinions about Pipelare's L'Homme Armé Mass. In his dissertation, dating from 1961, he wrote, "Pipelare's Missa L'Homme Armé is a work of strident sonorities. It contains some powerful music that achieves a forceful climax in Agnus 3. The Mass is not only a grandiose work, however, but also one unmarred by weak spots, the production of a composer in full command of his resources." However, in the complete edition of the music, published in 1967, he changes this to say, "Pipelare's Missa L'Homme Armé is a work of strident sonorities, achieving a forceful climax in the fanfare treatment of Agnus 3. However, the work is lacking in a display of technique that often characterizes L'Homme Armé masses. Canon does not appear until Agnus 3. In his article on Pipelare in the New Grove Dictionary of Music, originally published in 1980 and now called Oxford Music, Dr. Cross wrote, "The Missa L'Homme Armé contains some of Pipelare's most exciting writing, building up to a grandiose fanfare-like final Agnus that adds a second bassus to this already low-pitched work. Despite lacking the display of technique so often found in L'Homme Armé masses, the work was one of Pipelare's most popular, surviving in half a dozen sources." The Mass is indeed an unusual work containing shocking dissonances. Its four voice parts do not have standard ranges, and in our recording, the singers were often shuffled around to cover the parts. The four parts could be considered alto, tenor, baritone, and bass, but it is not that simple, and the ranges of the different parts vary from section to section. The transcription, both in the dissertation and in the published edition, shows an even wider tessitura in one of the sections, but I checked with one of the sources and found that an octave lower sign was omitted from the modern edition. Even with this correction, the voice ranges are extreme, with the bass part going down to a C sharp below the staff. This performance performs the work as written in Dr. Cross's edition, without transpositions, except that, as I mentioned, the clef error in the Christe liaison section is corrected. The performance features the singers of Collectio Musicorum, an ensemble I founded in 2014 and devoted to, as our motto says, performing the best works of music from the earliest times. Unlike many other ensembles, we do not focus solely on one time period or genre, but are devoted to performing the music that other groups do not. In honor of Dr. Cross, we have performed many of the works of Pipelare, and we are glad that we have had the opportunity to assemble the top choral singers from New York who came out in July of 2021 to record this Mass. We thank all of the singers whose names appear in the credits after the performance, especially Patrick Fennig, who, in addition to being one of them, contracted the performers for this project, and Terry Prideaux, who helped with the logistics at both the rehearsal studio and the recording location. We are grateful to the Early Music Foundation, especially Frederick Rentz, the artistic director, and Daniel Guss, the general manager, who chose this performance as part of the video equipment support project. Thanks also to videographer Ian Hutter, who filmed this video, and Dong-Suk Shin, who recorded the performance, as well as the nice people at the First Church of Christ Scientist in Manhattan, where the recording took place. I hope you enjoy the performance, which may be found on YouTube or on the Collectio Musicorum website.